Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Sanzo with MassLive, and today I'm here with reporter Hadley Barndollar, who has been involved in conducting a months-long investigation into what a pill press machine is and how this machine has essentially elevated the illicit drug trade in Massachusetts. So thank you for being here with me, Hadley, to talk about this. She has currently a 3-part series into this topic on masslive.com. So if you are interested in reading more, you can head to our website, and there is a 4th one on the way. But we can kind of just jump right into this. Let's talk about, from the beginning, how the idea for this investigation came to fruition. How did you get into the story, and where was the interest in doing it?
Yeah, so I have been covering the opioid crisis since I started in journalism, which is about 10 years ago. So, obviously during that time, I am, constantly monitoring trends, emerging storylines, stories that have not been told yet. And about a year ago, even before I joined MassLive as a reporter back in March, I started seeing pill presses being mentioned much more frequently in law enforcement communications, arrests, court documents. It wasn't something I'd ever seen mentioned before. So I started kind of taking a mental note of that. And at one point, I just ended up personally tracking how often I was seeing pill presses being mentioned and where they were being mentioned. So it ultimately got to the point where I had collected so many references that I felt confident that this was a new wave of the opioid crisis. And I decided I wanted to pursue a project on it, where we essentially learned that these are, machines that in their nature aren't nefarious, but they are being used nefariously by drug traffickers today to manufacture potentially lethal methamphetamine and fentanyl pills in Massachusetts and in neighborhoods across America.
So because your reporting was so intricate and, this investigation has been a span of a few months now, let's talk a little bit about the access that you were given through your whole investigation. You had a ride along, you've gone to the DEA office. Let's talk a little bit about that and what that was like.
Yeah, so I was given terrific access for this story by many different sources that spanned law enforcement, addiction medicine, harm reduction, drug policy, like a really robust set of thoughts on this. And I was given really great access by the Drug Enforcement Administration. The first meeting that we had with them, my photographer and I walked into their Boston office, and sitting right there on a dolly in front of us was a 300-pound pill press machine. And right there that day, the agent helped us learn more about the machine, walked us through how drug traffickers are actually utilizing it to create these counterfeit pills. On another occasion, I was invited along for a ride along with the DEA to kind of monitor from afar a controlled methamphetamine buy. And there was a lot of adrenaline in that. It was, a lot of rush. I got to sit in a car with an agent while this was taking place. And I kind of got to learn more about how the federal agency builds cases against these larger scale traffickers and manufacturers.
Just because I'm, my own curiosity, was that anything like you expected? Getting essentially like a front row seat into, what a DEA agent is doing.
It was definitely more like Law and Order on TV than I expected. Like it is very much like you see on TV, but there is such an adrenaline in that you really don't know what's going to happen. The buy could become violent. It could go sideways somehow. Okay. The suspect may not show up. So there's a lot of different things that can go wrong, and it's a very highly contained situation that they're monitoring.
So during your investigation, that includes visiting different communities, correct? So let's talk a little bit about the neighborhoods you were visiting, and if you saw or noticed anything shocking, out of the ordinary. Tell us about that.
So I think one thing that reporting this project proved to us is that there is no one type of community where these pills are being manufactured. It is impacting communities of all statures, low-income communities, wealthy communities, urban communities, and rural communities. It's happening in communities of every type. And I think I was most stunned by the list of cities and towns that I collected where pill press operations had been uncovered over the last 5 years, because some of them you would just really never think that's where some activity like this would be going on. So in terms of our neighborhood visits, we visited 2 very different communities. We visited an urban neighborhood in Lawrence where a pill press operation had been uncovered in May. And then we went down to the South Shore to Whitman, which is, a very suburban community. And a pill press operation had been discovered there in an industrial park, a contractor bay with adjoining offices. So two very different cases, very different communities. And I think it all emphasized to us that these were just regular American neighborhoods where kids were riding their bikes outside, mom and dad were going to work, people were gardening, and, as alleged by police, there was a pill press operation going on in the house next door.
So would you say the consensus is usually, the stigma is that people only associate the, maybe like urban communities, low-income communities with being the communities that are pushing out, all these drugs?
Certainly, and I think that's also true for the narrative around the southern border. And while there's definitely a fentanyl issue at the southern border, I think our investigation proved that this manufacturing is actually also happening right here in our backyards. It is not just a foreign issue. It's happening right here.
So now when we talk about counterfeit pills, I think just for the audience who is viewing this right now, what should people know about counterfeit pills? Anything to be aware of?
Yeah, so to take it back at the most basic level, when we say counterfeit pills today, we're most likely talking about pills made of fentanyl and methamphetamine that are being disguised as legitimate oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, and Valium. And in most cases, they're almost virtually indistinguishable. It's very challenging to tell the difference between the two. So basically, most of the folks that I talked to said that unless you are receiving a prescription today directly from a doctor and a legitimate pharmacy, there is a very good chance that there is fentanyl in the pill. You should not be taking pills from friends. You should not be taking pills you get at a party. You should not be taking pills that you buy online. That is the general consensus that I heard from sources. But I also want to note that there's a big harm reduction piece in this as well. There are people who use drugs who actively use counterfeit pills, and there is all sorts of harm reduction strategies that they can utilize. We have drug testing locations around the state where people could actually bring their drug supply and get it tested to see what's in it. There are fentanyl test strips. People should never use alone. People should make sure they have Narcan on hand. So if people are going to make the choice to use, pills that may contain fentanyl and methamphetamine, here's a slew of strategies to reduce their harm.
Definitely. Okay, so before we wrap up, is there anything else you think our audience should know? Anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, like you and I kind of mentioned, there is a stigma that drug manufacturing and drug trafficking is something that happens elsewhere, that is like a border issue. And while that is true, and while that is the case, our investigation really showed about how these illicit activities have taken root here, right in Massachusetts. And there are a lot of different paths being taken to try to address it. And at this point, we're not sure what is going to be the most effective, and there are varying opinions on how to do it, right, as there has always been, in terms of discussing the war on drugs. But I think we were able to make a powerful conclusion with this piece, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, thank you so much, Hadley, for joining us. Like I mentioned earlier, Hadley has a full deep dive 3-part series into the pill press and the illicit drug industry. So you can check that out on MassLive.com to read more. And she even has a 4th story on the way. So thank you for joining us, and we are going to sign off.